Joining me now is RedBridge Group Director Simon Welsh. Simon, great to see you. We've been talking about cost of living pretty much ever since you've been on this show. But you've also talked about, yes, people wanting that short-term relief, but they want some big ideas.
Yeah, that's right, Laura. I think when we think about this budget coming up, we've sort of got to really understand the context in which this budget is about to drop. For many Australians, for millions of Australians, we are entering the fifth year of some really significant social and economic upheaval. I say for millions of Australians because it started with the bushfires, then it rolled into COVID, then it rolled into this economic crisis, cost of living crisis that we've had ever since. So there's a real sense of exhaustion, disengagement, despondency in the electorate now, and it's across multiple cohorts. That's the context in which this budget is dropping. So, yep, absolutely have to tick the box on meeting those expectations around cost of living relief and some help around that. Absolutely, that's like a given. Where the political opportunity or the risk, depending on which way it goes for this government, is being able to bring a bit of hope into the conversation. That's what people are desperate for right now, as I say, in that context of despondency. So they're looking for the plan for the future. How do we get back to, not even how do we get back to where we were before? Because I think a lot of the folk that we're talking to now kind of recognise, okay, life's not going to be like it was prior to COVID. But how do we get to somewhere better than where we are now? And those consistent themes around wanting big ideas around housing. How am I going to have a place to live? How can I get into the property market? How can I get out of the hunger games that is the rental market right now? Wages is something that's come up in the last sort of few months as a really critical point, because even if you get inflation under control, there's this belief in the electorate that, well, prices aren't going back to what they were before. Some of them might come back a little bit, but by and large, your fuel costs, your grocery costs, your utilities costs, once they've expanded, they don't come back in. So what are you going to do around wages? Because I can't afford those things now. And inflation, you might get inflation under control, but there's still inflation. Things will still be going up and my wages going nowhere. So wages has become a really important thing. Health and mental health particularly has become a really important thing in terms of what's going to give people hope for the future, because they see these services around them being diminished, and the mental health thing, tying into that context of despondency, has become a really, really important service that they're not seeing there's nothing there that gives them confidence in the accessibility of those services. So there's a whole lot of stuff that's swirling around here that the government really needs to land in this budget. I mean, you and I have sort of been saying since probably about the start of this year that it's sort of last chance stakes. If they can't land some sense that they've got a plan to take us somewhere better, then we've got real problems.
Well, I thought it was interesting this week that Jim Chalmers, inflation hasn't been the target band of the RBA, 2 to 3% for 10 years, but Jim Chalmers now turned around and said, you know what, it's going to happen by the end of the year. I think that was a great communication strategy going into the budget, because that's all anyone's been talking about, right? And when we look at the detail tonight, we're going to look for those measures that actually gets him there. And he's talking about fiscal measures, rather than just relying on the in a monetary sense from the RBA. But how big a risk is that for him, in your view? Would voters forgive him and the Albanese government if the timing was a bit off or didn't happen?
Yeah, look, I think any pronouncement like that comes with risk as much as it does opportunity. Yeah. I think there's a few things around that. The first is it's those kinds of big sort of macroeconomic targets. We're going to get inflation back into this band, just washes over people. That's not what they kind of want to be hearing right now. What they want to be hearing is, where is the coherent plan that addresses all these things that we've been talking about? Yes, inflation is a huge part of that, and that's a big problem. And good that they're working on it and getting it under control. Good, but where does it fit in a broader narrative of what this government is trying to deliver for us? And as I say, it's just to make life better, not necessarily even as good as it was. So I think there's an issue there. The other issue is people are just so disengaged. There is no anticipation or sense of anticipation around this budget. A lot of this stuff that we're sort of we talk about in the political bubble and those sorts of things just don't register. So we've done focus groups since Chalmers made that statement, and there's no impression. It hasn't touched the sides because of this sort of degree of disengagement. So they've got to even if they can do all those things that I've just articulated, they've still got a communication challenge of how do you get that through to an electorate now that is so despondent, so disengaged.
I know I keep on banging on about this, but I thought as a values proposition for them to halve the number of mental health visits that you could claim on Medicare at the start of this government was, I think, really damaging, to be honest, particularly with young people so engaged in that space and so worried about it. I don't even know whether there's going to be a big spend here on mental health in this budget, but would that go a long way, do you think?
That's the kind of stuff that people notice, because that's the kind of stuff that impacts them and impacts their family members directly. Not sort of statements in the media or big bold targets, that have no substance behind them. That's the very kind of tangible thing that, absolutely. They need to be doing those sorts of things, reinstating or even expanding, what was there before, because mental health has become this chronic problem, and people link it to other issues like family violence. And people link it to capacity to work. It has an economic impact. So, absolutely, it's kind of one of those. It has become a core problem